The meeting number 60 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, French or English. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. Screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Finally, a reminder to all that use of a House-approved headset is mandatory for remote participation in parliamentary proceedings. If a virtual participant is not wearing an appropriate headset, interpretation cannot be provided, and therefore that person will not be able to participate in the debate. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection test in advance of the meeting. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on January 18, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the ecosystem impacts and the management of pinniped populations. I would now like to welcome our first panel of witnesses. Appearing as individuals, we have fish harvester Trevor Jones and as well fish harvester Eldred Woodford, and representing the Guysborough County Inshore Fishermen's Association, Executive Director Ginny Boudreau. I hope I pronounced those names correctly because I could easily slaughter them being from Newfoundland. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. You will each have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement. I'll invite Mr. Jones to go first, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, and fellow presenters. Thank you for the invitation to speak today and be a witness on pinnipeds, its impacts on fish stocks, how it affects fish harvesters in the communities in which we live. I've been a professional fish harvester and seeder for over 30 years, and in that time, I've seen the commercial salmon fishery close and just a recreational fishery remain. Yet this stock has continued to decline with less and less fish every year returning to our rivers. I've seen a cod moratorium put in place in 1992, and 30 years later, this stock has not rebounded to anywhere near its historic levels, according to science. Just last year, we watched our federal fisheries minister put a moratorium on mackerel, and now rumors of a potential closure on capelin and other species that we harvesters depend on for our livelihood. Leadership within DFO and its wisdom seem to think that closing commercial fishery to our harvesters will save and help rebuild fish stocks, but the truth is, it does not, and we now have the history to prove that. In my lifetime, the only species that I have seen increase after reduction in harvesting, through the loss of markets that is the pinniped population. That is because it is at or near the top of the food chain, and we are the ones, harvesters and government, who must be responsible for harvesting at the correct level in order to maintain an healthy ecosystem. It is our duty to manage our resources properly, because when we don't, the impacts will be felt for generations to come. I have seen firsthand how much fish that is being destroyed by pinnipeds. I've harvested thousands of them and checked many of their stomachs and found a variety of fish species. Greenland halibut, or turbot as we call it, capelin, northern cod, Arctic cod, herring, mackerel, shrimp, lumpfish, young wolffish, and yes, even snow crab. I want to put into perspective just how huge of an impact this species is having on our resources. 5 out of the 10 provinces in Canada are affected by an overpopulation of pinnipeds, and 2 of the 3 territories. The population of Canada is near 39 million. We have somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of that number in pinnipeds in our waters off our coastlines. Can you imagine the volume of food that is required to feed these populations? I've taken out of the stomach of 1 old arp up to 5 turbot and 2 codfish, certainly a lot more than I could eat in one day, or any other person for that matter. Yet our ecosystem is feeding these animals, but not without damage being done to it. We are seeing more and more fish stocks being depleted and fisheries closed. All this is happening under the watch of current leadership. I have to ask the question, is this how we want our generation to be remembered? Fish stocks depleted because no action was taken to control the population of pinnipeds? If this population of pinnipeds was placed upon the land and everybody could see it, Then we would more likely deal with the issue and make efforts to reduce the populations. Because it is found in the ocean, and only those of us that are on the water can actually see it, and it's easy for leadership to ignore. The impacts this overpopulation of pinnipeds is having on harvesters and communities is devastating, to say the least. I've had to watch our fishery enter a time of consolidation, where harvesters like myself have had to keep reinvesting in this industry to make it viable. In order to make a reasonable living for ourselves and our crews that fish with us, we have had to buy up other fishing enterprises. So now we have 1/3 of the harvesting sector that we previously had. And by doing so, we thought that we should end up with maybe 3 times the fish to catch, but that is not the case. We have less and less fish to catch each year, and yet we spend more and more trying to survive. In closing, I'd like to say we, harvesters and our elected government, need to address the largest problem our fisheries has ever faced. An overpopulation of pinnipeds is decimating our fish stocks. And without industry and our elected officials together going to other countries and trying to open up markets for what is and can be a very valuable resource, our future as an industry looks very bleak. We have a justifiable cause to reduce the pinniped population. It will protect our fish resources and those that make a living from it. Thank you.
Mr. Jones will now go to Ms. Boudreau for 5 minutes or less. But I notice your camera, Ms. Boudreau, is still cutting in and out. If it continues to do that, just shut your camera off. We know it's you that's actually there talking to us, and it might allow you the voice to come through much clearer. So when you're ready for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much. Good day, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak. I'm very pleased that this committee wants to discuss the management of pinnipeds. The committee has been presented sufficient documentation and discussion to emphatically state that the pinniped population are at an extreme level never before recorded. Who could argue no negative effects on an ecosystem out of balance to such an excessive degree? One stock already showing consequences of not managing the pinniped biomass is Atlantic mackerel, and in Canada was placed under a moratorium in 2022. To date, the rebuilding plan model has been developed with recovery based on the absence of fishing effort only. In March of 2023, DFO Science finally identified gray seal predation as having an effect and is listed as the number 2 in the predator pyramid under the northern gannet due to the absence of seal diet data. I am of the opinion that northern gannet would not hold this position if we had more accurate data on gray seal diets both spatially and temporally. Management. DFO should be assigned new resources for seal diet studies. The Director General for Ecosystem Science, when asked by this committee if there was any new money for seal science, he did not answer yes. We do have excellent science on population dynamics. So why have we not taken this 50-year biomass data set, fed them into a DFO peer-reviewed assessment model, and developed an aggressive conservation harvesting plan and begin harvesting one of the richest untapped resources in Canadian waters? Management. Create a conservation harvesting plan that reflects the fishable biomass. I've heard many reasons why we can't do this. The MMPA is supposedly stopping us from harvesting seals. Seal harvesting is a legitimate fishery in Canada, regulated by DFO for over 50 years. It is proven to be a humane, sustainable, viable fishery carried out by certified professional harvesters, as well as a cultural, food, and ceremonial fishery for many of our Indigenous and coastal communities. Instead of being embarrassed, we should be celebrating and defending it within the MMPA regulations. Pinnipeds in Canada are not species of concern, endangered, threatened, or at risk. So why should the MMPA scare us from this rich resource? Many countries, including the US, have marine mammal takes for species that are in one or more of these risk categories, and pinnipeds are not. I see the MMPA as a tax on Canadian fisheries, where we jump through hoops at all costs. And I wonder what we'd be doing if this were beef, pork, or even blueberries. Management. Defend this fishery within the MMPA as a legitimate fishery. Another reason given is that we have no markets. Why? The Canadian governments have not invested in national or international markets, nor are they educating Canadians as to the benefits to our dietary health and economic well-being. We are embarrassed to promote an extremely high iron-rich meat, the highest omega-3 oil in the world, pelts and skins that are durable, warm, and yes, very fashionable. A resource that would add economic growth through harvesting, processing, and marketing within our communities and alleviate economic loss from our recently reduced tax and moratorium species. Negative social opinion exists because we have allowed the media and extreme environmental groups to educate Canadians on social conscience based on sensationalized inaccuracies in respect to pinniped harvesting. Management, invest resources into a major education and promotion plan for pinniped harvesting and marketing, and be proud of it. DFO stated to this committee that pinniped harvesting would fall under the emerging fisheries policy. This policy will surely set us back 10 to 15 years. Pinniped fisheries have been developed for many decades with professional, certified harvesters in community hunts, cultural rights, DFO regulated commercial sealing industry. How is this now all of a sudden an emerging fishery? What will happen to the predator species in 10 to 15 years? Management. DFO should certify professional apprentices once they have completed their humane and animal husbandry courses. DFO should not be permitted to place the pinniped fishery as an emerging fishery and set the seal industry backwards. Infrastructure. Federal governments should commit real resources to the territories and with the territories and provinces, invest in the harvesting and processing as well as a national and international marketing plan for pinnipeds. Doing nothing is no longer an option. In 10 to 15 years, what will we be feeding these pinnipeds? They won't be eating mackerel. I thank you so very much for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to the question period. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Woodford for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, fellow committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you here today. I don't have a formal presentation done. I'm going to speak off the cuff. Generally, I would be reiterating exactly what the previous two speakers had done. Myself and Trevor are the same age. We started fishing in the late 80s, and we witnessed some, some drastic changes to our fishery in general. Speak to you today, I guess, on dealing with pinnipeds. I not only am a professional commercial fish harvester, I'm also a professional commercial sealer. I'm also the president of the Canadian Sealers Association. I've had the opportunity previous to sit to committees like this and speak to you. The time has come. We don't need any more studies on seals. We don't need any more science on seals. We need actions on seals. There was a commission back in the 80s by Minister Malouf at the time with recommendations. There's been Senate standing committees recommendations to harvest seals. There's been recommendation and report after report after report that's been done and packed on the shelf. The time has come. We need action. Here in Newfoundland, in those rural communities that we have here now, you have to drive it to see the devastation that it is. There's no longer communities reside, no longer filled with fish harvesters and fishing families, mostly tourists now. Mainlanders come to buy up the properties because our locals have left. It's because of our doomed fishery. Me and Trevor were fortunate. We survived the cod moratorium of the 90s because of the crab. That was the fact. One resource survived us. And I mean, the devastation that we've seen in the last decade to all the other species because of the predation of seals. I mean, there was years I was definitely against the call for seals because I was concerned and wanted to be responsible as a sealer to maintain a population that was providing me with my second source of income from my enterprise, second largest source of income, which were seals. Excuse me. If I can remember when I was a boy growing up here in Herring Neck, the sealers in the community would go out. They would hunt and harvest tens of thousands of seals in the 80s to rebuild the markets, to rebuild an industry that we did see prosper from the mid-90s on to the early 2000, 2005, 6, like that. We were harvesting up to 250,000 to 350 to 400,000 animals. The market was demanding product. We had products to sell. But what happened? The politicians did not do their job. The government of Canada did not do its job. We had products getting banned in country after country. We don't need work to develop new products. We don't need no more science. If you mind to look at the science on all the fisheries, the seal industry has been studied more than any other fishery. And so, I mean, I don't need to reiterate what Trevor said earlier or what Jenny was saying because I support them 100%. I'm here, I just tell you that I'm a fish harvester, I'm a sealer, I have great concerns about the future of our industry and our rural coastal communities, and I welcome any questions in your question period. Thank you.
We'll start now with our first round of questioning. For 6 minutes or less, we'll go to Mr. Small, and I will say to all the participants, please try and identify who you want to answer the question instead of leaving them hanging wondering who should answer it. You'll make better use of your time. When you're ready, Mr. Small, 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try my best. My first question to Mr. Woodford, President of the Canadian Sealers Association. Mr. Woodford, what do you think, well, you mentioned markets. Would you say that markets, or lack thereof, is the main stumbling block to the harvesting of the current quota of seals?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Small. Yes, most definitely the markets got all to do with it. I mean, you had to watch this industry, grow in this industry, and see what happened. I mean, we had markets that the doors were open, full access to it. We had 4 processing companies here in Newfoundland who were fully utilizing, and not fully utilizing all the animal, but they were fully tasked with the 350,000 animals that we were providing them. A lot of people getting work. Products were not left on the shelves. They were going through the system. The bans that were put in place in the European Union and in Russia, and the doors that did not get open to Chinese market. I mean, we had one of the former Minister of Fisheries here in St. John's at the Delta Hotel. I mean, rejoiced that we had the biggest market in the world. The Chinese market opened up, but yet for all, nothing ever materialized. So, I mean, something behind the scenes got to be done. We as participants, as harvesters or as processors, our hands are tied. With regards to the bans and the access to markets, it's not the market, Mr. Small. It's the access to the markets. That is the problem. We've got products that's banned. Transshipment companies don't want to touch the products because of the controversy, because we have not dealt with it and educated the world as to the facts. Thank you.
So again, do you think that the government should be more committed to gaining market access, to a marketing campaign, to some kind of an investment to ensure that there's a steady access and a growth versus what you saw in around 2009?
Exactly. I mean, we knew those bans were coming in place, and we tried a few I guess, defense ways to try to offset it, but it didn't work. It didn't materialize. It was it had too much of a foundation built at the time to stop it. But I mean, it was only a few years later, and we were into dealings and negotiations with the European Union, with the CETA deal. And I mean, neither our provincial government nor our federal government had the foresight enough to use that opportunity to regain our market access for our legitimate, natural, renewable products. That's what it is. It's nothing could be any greener to the economy or to the environment than our seal products. And yet for all, it was discarded as it didn't mean nothing because, generally speaking, it only pertained to a small population of Canadians. And I guess that's why they stepped away from it. But I mean, it was not logical.
So a question for Mr. Jones, Mr. Chair. Minister Murray recently accused Conservatives of wanting a cull. That's certainly not the case on our side, and but from your perspective I think you're the representative for the FFAW for your area as well. Would you be looking for a full utilization harvest, or would you prefer to see a cull? What would be the best thing in your opinion?
Thank you, Mr. Small. Absolutely, full utilization would be an answer from anybody from our table. Any fish harvester wants to see whatever you're harvesting used to the best of ability for mankind as a whole, you know. So, and it has lots of nutrients and beneficial products that can come from seal harvesting. So I believe, you know, as Elder had already said, the access to markets so we can utilize the product. In a world this size with such a population as we have, certainly 400 or 500,000 animals harvesting should be, should be not hard to move. So it's just we got to get into the governments. Governments got to go there and have discussions with other governments, you know.
Again, to Mr. Jones, we often hear that if Canada harvests pinnipeds in a meaningful way, we'll be faced with trade sanctions against our seafood products. Given that Norway, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and Japan currently hunt whales, how realistic are the threats of these sanctions against our seafood industry in our international markets? Do you believe in that?
When we look at the rest of the world and Norway and them countries, obviously they harvest a lot more fish than we do because they keep their seal population down naturally, pinnipeds down. But no, I don't believe it. I believe that's a myth. I think that's an excuse that's used by animal rights activists, and certainly is far from the truth. We have a responsibility to protect fish stocks, and if harvesting seals is part of that and giving us a balanced ecosystem, then how can anybody argue with that? Like, we're not going to be wasteful over it. We're just trying to do what's right in our ecosystem. If we don't, then we're going to go the other way, and we're going to have our stock decimated. And to what? Because somebody just don't like the fact that we're harvesting a mammal out of the ocean. It's our God-given right and ability to do this and manage the stock in this manner.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Your time has gone a little bit over. We'll now go to Mr. Callaway, please, for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses that are here today. And my questions actually will be directed to Ginny Boudreau. And Ginny, it's great to see you. First, want to thank the Guysborough County Inshore Fishermen's Association for all that you do, all of you, and the work you do. You previously wrote, Ginny, that any new gray seal management procedure must be supported by financially by commercial industry, the ecological preservation groups, and the Federal Fisheries Department. I'm curious into your insight as to the position you envision for industry groups such as yours and ecological preservation groups moving forward.
Yes, thank you for the question. As harvesters, our role is to harvest the resource. We are fishermen. I'm not a fisherman. I represent fishermen, and I work with fishermen, and I represent the fishing industry. It is our responsibility to harvest whatever marine resources that are commercially viable in the ocean to support our communities, to support our families. And it's our role to do that responsibly. We look at to science for a biomass that says that this is the level that you can harvest safely based on scientific data sets. We have them in tenfold, and then it's the Department of Fisheries and Oceans' responsibility to develop the policy, to develop the IFMPs, to develop the management scheme around these biomasses. then the federal and provincial governments, their responsibility is to market and to ensure that these fisheries are completed safely and humanely in relation to seals or any animal that you're harvesting. So it's the role of the environmental groups. Their role is to ensure that what we are harvesting is not putting any one species or that food web that's attached to that species at risk. I don't really see any risk for pinnipeds.
Thanks, Ginny. I'm going to stay with you. In my interactions with you and the association, you always come, you and your group, with ideas and strong recommendations. So I'm going to ask you to put some thought into this, but I'm pretty sure you have a really good answer. If we're looking at, we've heard throughout the SEAL Summit so far in our conversations here on this study that one of the most important things is access to markets and the utilization of the full seal. But I'm curious as to what steps can we take to move this ball forward in a substantial way in the short term and long term in terms of the industry itself and how we market it, how we access markets, because I know your organization is on the cutting edge of how best we can do that.
Yes, and thank you for the question. Any species that we harvest, there's has to be a market for it, or we wouldn't be harvesting it. If we're not going to get paid for our work, and we're going to take a resource from the marine environment, then the return on that has to be greater than the effort and the cost put into that. So that will dictate the level of involvement for harvesters. The market, if it's not there, then how do we develop that? Well, that's not rocket science, and we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel for this. How do we develop markets for any species that we harvest? In fact, how do we develop markets in Canada for blueberries, for beef, for pork, and all the challenges that come along with those? We have policy in place. We show our proven track record. We show the chain of custody to show that food product is safe, that it's harvested sustainably. It's promotion. It's pride. It's the Canadian government standing up for the seal industry and saying that this is a sustainable harvest. This is a humane harvest. The biomass is unbelievable. The resource is there for Canadians. I it just boggles my mind how we can't get around this, because there are customers out there. There's customers that want to utilize every part of the seal. We were even talking about using the offal and the waste for bait as an alternative to some of our other forage species that have very low biomasses currently. It's putting that whole picture together. And I see the role of the provincial government as well as the federal government in assisting the industry to get those processing plants, the facilities up and running. Then into the markets, like, China is a huge market. The UK is a huge market. The whole world is starving for high protein, the omega-3, the pelts. I don't know why we're challenged with this. We are not challenged with anything else we're trying to promote and market. I hope that answers your question.
It certainly does, and I really appreciate the thoughtful answers.
Thank you, Mr. Callaway. We'll now go to Madame Michaud for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux témoins pour votre présence. C'est bien apprécié. Écoutez, je dois être honnête avec vous. Je suis pas une aussi bonne connaisseuse des pêches que la collègue que je remplace aujourd'hui, ma collègue Caroline. Mais
We'll
oui.
wait for a second. There's no translation.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing. The interpreter apologizes. He was on the wrong channel. So I'll start from the top. Thank you to the witnesses for agreeing to our invitation to appear before the committee today. We're very interested in your expertise, and I don't share the same expertise as my colleague Caroline, who I'm replacing today, but I come from a region where fisheries are extremely important, the Gaspé. And here at the committee, you've heard from the Gaspé Fishers Association that talked about their fishery being suspended of mackerel, for example, and that had major ramifications for them. And I'm sure that you heard what Minister Murray said to them when they questioned the minister on the issue. He said perhaps they should change jobs, change careers, instead of proposing a concrete solution or compensating them financially. So obviously that's another kettle of fish, but when you read the fishery study, I understand that there's a link between the population of pinnipeds and the mackerel fisheries resource, for example. Mackerel referred to the cod fishery, crab fishery, the shrimp fishery. So am I understanding things correctly? The fact that there are some fisheries being suspended of some species, it means that there is an overpopulation perhaps of pinnipeds. Is that true? And if it is true, could you elaborate on that, please?
Who would you like to answer your question?
Je vais parler à Monsieur.
Mr. Jones, please, first.
Thank you for the question. The relationship between all of our stocks decimation is not because we're over harvesting. We're harvesting at a lower level than we've ever harvested most species. So, the only relationship we can see is through the pinniped population that have exploded and our fish stocks has went down. I don't see anybody can argue with that. And to say that we need to find something else to do. I'm a big mackerel fishery, was all my life. I'm an advocate because we should be harvesting mackerel now. But yet, here we are in a moratorium. So I don't know how to further apply or answer the question, to be honest with you. But we've just to see the massive amounts of stock of seals in our ocean, in our bays here now with all the young. The population is going to increase again this year, and we're going to harvest somewhere around 35 or 40,000 maybe. That's what it seems like, a modest harvest, and we should be harvesting 400,000. So it's got to be decimating our stocks.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for your answer. And I think that you are basically saying the same thing that sorry, I can't see his name. Yes, Mr. Woodford said earlier when he said that there have been enough studies, enough research over a number of years, and that you're out there in the field, on the water, at sea, you know what's going on. You'd like action on the part of the government. The Bloc Québécois held a roundtable on fisheries and the black whale last September, and we had fishers of all different species that were there. It was highly informative, and that's when I learned that the DFO doesn't necessarily consult harvesters, because they're afraid of there being a conflict of interest. But it's not an issue of a conflict of interest. The fact is that harvesters know what's going out on out in the field and can help the officials from the DFO to take the action that should be taken. Is that the case with pinnipeds? Is there a lack of a consultative process? Are they not consulting those out in the field, harvesters, fishers? And this question is for all three witnesses. If you could take turns at responding, please. Ms. Boudreau, to begin with, perhaps?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's near and dear to my heart. And I'm 100% am convinced that harvesters need to be consulted. In almost all cases, they have the answers if they're asked and allowed to contribute. The issue with many of our stocks are that because of the lack of seal diet data sets, it is very difficult or to access the existing ones and to get the Department of Fisheries and Oceans scientists and managers to include seal predation on the whatever species we're talking about. The mackerel, only just in 2023 did we actually get that as part of the assessment that they're a predator. Well, gee, there's a revelation. Fishermen have been telling the department this for over 20 years, and not just in mackerel, in cod, in herring, in halibut. The species goes right down the line. So it's imperative that we have input and that we get to contribute to what the predator are in the fishery. And that's not to say that say that the fishing effort does not impact fishing stocks. But when we have a biomass and we have a model that's fed into it, and we're the only ones that are fed into the model, then the output is going to come out wrong every time. Right now, we can afford a small amount of time to come up with a harvesting plan for pinnipeds. Very soon, and if not, we may already be past it. The point where harvesting is not going to do it. We're going to have to start talking about a cull. As harvesters, we don't want to have that conversation. We want to have the conversation of how can we harvest these? That's the solution from harvesters. But we at that time, a clock is ticking, and we are getting to the point where these fish species can no longer, absorb the predation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Michaud. Gone a little bit over. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to set my timer so I can do the good job of staying on time there. There we go. I got it. Thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses here today. My first question is for Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, you had spoken about the importance of full utilization of pinniped harvesting. And I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about whether you currently have the infrastructure in place to successfully harvest in a manner that allows for full utilization of the seal harvest. What's in place currently, what's needed, what government support would be required in order to ensure that such a harvest would be sustainable and, as you say, fully utilizing the entire pinniped?
That's a tall question. I'll try to do my best with it. My own self, the last number of years, I have harvested older seals over the younger ones for the purpose of full utilization. We harvest the meat, some organs, and pelt, fat, and we've even brought in some daddlers with nails and that so they could use that or do some experimental work with that. So there's quite a bit of infrastructure in place, I guess, when it comes to processing facilities, not just seal plants now, but other plants as well that do fish products. But we certainly would need an investment if you were going to do a large scale full utilization on the animals, no doubt. If you're going to harvest 400,000 that's a huge number for full utilization, especially on the older seals. So we would require, no doubt, quite a bit of infrastructure to help that along. But the first step would be markets. I believe the infrastructure would fall in place once we had the markets in place where we can move the products. So I don't know if that helps or that's enough for the answer for you or not.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. And sounds like it's a continued conversation. I do agree. Actually, that was going to be my next question to you, Mr. Jones, was around the market. I know you've spoken to it already in your testimony and to other questions, but I'm wondering, you had discussed around the importance of governments working with other governments, and could you share with us a little bit around the barriers that you see in your position and that you're hearing from fish harvesters in, any barriers that you're seeing in us being able to move over and move forward? And what do you think would be helpful to have these discussions moving at a quicker pace? What do you think that you could do on your end, or what do we need to know in order to move forward in a constructive way? Perhaps that's a better question.
Perhaps a better relationship between the harvesters and the government themselves, and then we don't air tell of any real conversations with other governments over this issue. Our friends to the south of us, I mean, a huge population, 300 million or so, and a great market, yet they've had a ban on it for decades. Those conversations needs to be had with top level officials. We need to make them realize just how huge impact this overpopulation of pinnipeds is having on our fish resources that the world needs. There's starving people that need. We're going to need it, and we're going to continue to need it. I need it now for a living, and my fellow harvesters and the rest of our country need it for good protein and whatnot. So. We just got to get down and have these real conversations. But we're not hearing tell of any of that. We don't see no effort from our governments in that manner. If it's being done, then we're not being told about it. So at least let us know where the government truly stands on it.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. What are your thoughts around the Canadian market specifically, so within?
I think there's been some promoting going on in the last year or so from the SEAL Summit I attended there this fall. There was talks of some marketing that has been done. No doubt we could expand more. There's lots of people within this country that like seal, or can acquire a taste for it and its products. So I think we're doing very good, but we can do much better, I believe.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Bedreau. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. I'm wondering if you could build off the question I know you were speaking about in your testimony around the importance of a international marketing plan around pinnipeds. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more around how you foresee that working, what needs to be done for us to move forward in a more timely manner on this plan.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that, excuse me, a good start would be to have our federal minister come out and publicly promote the seal industry in Canada for what it actually is. In my presentation, I mentioned the meat, the oils, the pelts, even fashion. It's a whole product. It's not a challenge to utilize the whole animal. It's a matter of Canada sticking up for this industry and saying, yeah, we're proud of this. This is part of our culture. This is part of our economy. This is part of who we are. And it's not to say that we're barbarians and that we club baby seals. That's the perception out there. But our Canadian government has allowed that perception to be out there. It would go so far if our minister would come out and say, this is a viable, sustainable, humane industry. And then we build it, they'll come. If we put the investment into the infrastructure to grow these markets internationally and nationally, even I think that nationally, it is very important that we do that foundation work first. Because if we don't have our own Canadian people promoting this and supporting this, then how can we expect to expand it into the international market? And that goes for our politicians as well.
Thank you,
I
Ms.
hope
Barron. You're
that
going a good bit over, actually, and we'll go now to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be splitting my time with Mr. Perkins. And thank you to the witnesses for appearing before the committee. I want to start out with Mr. Woodford. You mentioned that there's been a number of studies done over the years. Would you be able to provide a list of the studies that you're aware of to the committee so that those can be submitted as testimony for this study as well? You can provide that in writing to the clerk if you could. I think it would be very helpful. Would you be able to provide that?
I most certainly could, sir, but I would imagine that you probably got a list of it there maybe a week or so ago with Mr. Bob Arty. I think he done a presentation to your committee as well. So he's done a massive amount of work putting this all together. So I'm assuming that he presented that to you. If not, then I definitely can get a copy of it and provide it to the committee.
Okay,
But,
thank you. We'll double check that list then. Thank you very much. Really limited time here. So for Mr. Jones now, I guess, Mr. Jones, could you describe what you and your network of colleagues see as the biggest impediments to growth in Canada's fisheries industry? And that be all types of fisheries, regrowth of the cod, harvest, the other fisheries that are potentially there, and even the seal fisheries, if you want to call it that. What would you describe as the biggest impediments?
The biggest impediment to growth. It appears that they've been always, as Jenny had alluded to, are blaming it on the harvesters and the overfishing, but it's certainly not the case. We've got the right environment. We've got everything we need naturally, but we've got what we're missing, or what people are not seeing is that overpopulation of pinnipeds that's eating away at our livelihood, eating away at our fish stocks. 2J harvesters in Labrador. One of their biggest impediments to the growth of their fish stocks and the struggles they're having is pinnipeds. That's where they spend most of their year until some comes up in our bays. But that is where the biggest population of our herd of seals is for the bulk of the year. So if we want fish stocks to grow and rebound, we have to address this overpopulation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Boudreau, at the SEAL Summit last fall, the big announcement at the end of the day from the minister was that we needed to do more science to figure out what seals were eating. Do we need to do more science?
I didn't think that was such a big announcement, but thank you for pointing that out. Yes, we do need to do more seal science, but only in relation to the effects of these pinniped populations on the ecosystem, on that food web. What are these species eating? We know what they're eating. Harvesters know what they're eating. We see it. We're living it every day. But that has failed to get into the data sets that are presented by our species scientists and managers. And that is the only area that I feel we need more science on.
Mr. Jones, you fish a lot of mackerel, and there is a DFO slide, I think it came from the Atlantic Mackerel Advisory Committee meeting in Halifax a few weeks ago, that shows that the gray seal's stomach contents that DFO found had eaten more than 47% of the diet in the winter, or the samples in the winter, were mackerel. Mackerel aren't supposed to be around, I thought, in the winter. So what's happening that they would be eating mackerel?
Obviously, is a shift in the biomass of mackerel. Our waters stay warmer for longer. Throughout the winter. You can see that in our ice flows, how they disappear much faster than in previous years. The weather conditions, whatnot, but that mackerel seems to be staying in our waters more throughout the year and for longer periods of time. So I guess that's why if they're there more, then the grey seals is going to be eating a lot more throughout. So it's going to be affecting that stock even more. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. A little bit over, but we'll try and make up for that as we go. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. And my question would be to Ms. Boudreau and then possibly Mr. Jones. But in fairness, Ms. Boudreau, I've heard the current minister articulate exactly what you said, that promote the value of the Canadian seal, its products, and how it's harvested in a humane way. In fact, in fairness, most ministers over the past 20 years have been saying the same from both former government and this government. They've also been making the comment that we have to expand markets as a solution. None of those markets have never come. And the seal herd, everybody recognizes that there is a current allowable hunt of somewhere between 400 and 500,000 animals, and I understand 600,000 would be optimum to bring the seal herd back in balance on the East Coast. So my question is, and this discussion has occurred for some time with no resolution, to have a market, you need a customer. Who is the customer that we are missing? Who is the customer? Because without a customer, then I fail to see what the solution would be. But who is the customer that we should be identifying for the products that would come from a sustainable harvest? Ms. Boudreau, and then I'd be curious on Mr. Jones's comment.
Thank you. First and foremost, I am your customer. I buy seal oil tablets right currently. I buy mittens and I buy boots for my grandchildren, and I want them. I make them wear them to school, by the way, and they do get very interesting responses. But I am your customer. My neighbors are your customer. Canadians are our customer, and then we expand. We go to who do we currently market our products, our marine products to? The United States, China, the UK, over the whole world. There are people starved for protein. Protein is becoming one of the most difficult and expensive items that we require in our diet to access. It's
then where's the disconnect? Because yes, you identify you're a customer, but we're harvesting 18,000 seals or somewhere around that. So we need more customers than you and whoever else identify to sustain a harvest of somewhere it's estimated about 600,000 animals is what the harvest would have to be to stabilize the seal population and reduce it to a manageable level that would not have the impact on other fisheries. So while that's okay to say, but you need a substantive customer base. And then this is where I want to go to Mr. Jones, and I believe you may have commented on it as well, Ms. Boudreau, is do we have the adequate infrastructure to harvest that capacity of animals at sea and get it back to land in a state that an entrepreneur can process that product in products that are sellable. And I'm referring to the fishing fleet. I'm not familiar with it in Newfoundland, but you're dealing with a very bulky, large animal, and you have to get it back to a processor in a state that processor can do something with it. So do we have the adequate infrastructure to harvest effectively at sea? To one, because if we don't solve that problem, then you're not going to build that customer base or that market base. You have to be able to target and get enough animals back to shore in a sustained basis, on a long-term basis, that will give the confidence to the processor to process. Would you comment, Ms. Boudreau, and then Mr. Jones? And I'll be over time.
Thank you. I cannot currently access all the products when I want them and as readily as I would like to have them. So as a customer, that's an issue for me. So we're already not producing enough. The issue with whether we have the capability or capacity on our vessels, we handle tuna right now, bluefin tuna, massive species. And if there was an investment by the government and a market, harvesters will invest in their vessels so that they can respond to this fishery. I'll let Trevor.
Well, actually, I'd ask Mr. Jones if he could send in a response in writing to the committee, please, because Mr. Morrissey has gone a little bit over time, and we're trying to keep it as close as we can to the suggested time frame. I'll now go to Madame Michaud for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'll continue along the same lines with you, Ms. Goudreau. Earlier, my colleague from the New Democrats asked you questions about an international marketing campaign. What do we have at a local level? You talked about commercialization of the product, not just the flesh. You spoke about oil and other derivative products, the pelt, the skin. Now, at a local level, Sandra Dlukier from Explorer Mer last week said that there are over 200 restaurants in Quebec and also grocery stores that would like to get their hands on these products. But unfortunately, there's no supply for these business people. What's the local vision before we think about marketing on the world stage at an international level?
I think Mr. Woodford would probably have a better response to that, because that is definitely his area of expertise. If you wouldn't mind me passing the question on to him.
Absolument, allez-y.
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Well, the international market, the market was there. The doors were shut. We had products. The Canadian seal industry, the Newfoundland seal industry in general, was a success story. We built this industry from a few thousands in the 80s up to years we harvested 350, 360,000 and could have harvested more. The demand was there. The customers were there. The markets were being addressed. We had 4 processing companies on the island that produced seals, competed for the seals, put a great value onto the seals. When we lost our access to market, those companies generally shut down, one after the other after the other. Right now, we only have one. But as someone stated earlier, as the questioning, what do we need? We need access to markets because the customers are there. The customers are the general population out there that could walk into the store and could look at a product and make a personal decision on whether or not they wanted to buy that product. That has never been the problem. The problem has always been the access. I mean, our success in Newfoundland from building a seal industry after the white coat ban of the 80s, I mean, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. The communities were ecstatic. The money that was being generated, the extra money, the plant workers working all the time. I mean, and it was providing the international marketplace with the product. These products weren't being sold here in Canada. For the last few years, the government has invested greatly in the Canadian market, and for some reason, I guess it's not taking a foothold, but it's the only thing now that's keeping our our industry alive today is a small Canadian market. But I mean, our main market has been internationally. It always has been, and probably always would be. So, I mean, the industry needs assistance in the ability to access the marketplace. That is what it is. We talk about DFO and its studies and all the reports that's been written. I mean, I was at the SEAL Forum in November when Minister Murray made a statement that it was the first official SEAL Forum. That's not true. I was at the larger, much larger SEAL Forum in 2002 when the industry made recommendations that was going to be required to see attention and to be addressed in order that we wouldn't be in the state that we are today, because industry predicted all of this. I mean, if for anyone's information, we as a Canadian seal industry was the first industry in Canada to adopt the precautionary approach framework for dealing with the seal population. At the time in 2002 was somewhere in the vicinity of 4.8 to 5.2 million animals. And it was providing us at the time with a total allowable catch of somewhere in the vicinity of 320,000 animals per year. And that did somewhat control the population, but it still increased. So, I mean, now we're at a point where our population of seals are up in around the tens of millions. One gentleman earlier said we'd need a harvest of 600,000 to control it. Well, that would be only to control it. We need a number much larger than that now to do the protection that our ecosystem and our fish stocks need. And it's only a matter of time. I sat here this evening as a favor to a person to come here and do this because I've seen so much of this in the last 30 years that I'm full to the chin, pretty much. And I mean, we need action. The action right now is a call to control the population on an ecosystem basis. Boys, if either one of us in general had an aquarium and you had fish growing in it and you tossed in a seal, you would know what he do. And I mean, if you need to do studies on what seals eat, seals are the most opportunistic feeder in the ocean. They will eat whatever is there in that vicinity. So, I mean, all the studies previously, going back some 30 years, they may have been taken from seals in the bays when there are no capelin, when there are no cod. He's living off the fat reserves that's in its fat.
Thank you, Mr. Woodford. I got to end it there. We come way over. I want to get Ms. Barron in before we end this first hour of testimony. Ms. Barron, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Jones again. Mr. Jones, help me understand the information here. So just to be clear, I'm very much in support of a region-specific sustainable seal harvest, and I feel like we've received ample information to move in to support a move for region-specific sustainable seal harvesting already to date. What I'm trying to understand, though, is that we are hearing that there's a pressure for this to happen immediately, and that this needs to be done timely. I'm also hearing that we don't have the infrastructure in place, we don't have the market in place, that we need to have an international market for this to be successful. So if we're truly wanting to move forward with a sustainable seal harvest and not a cull, which is what I'm being told over and over that it's not what we're pushing for, what do we need to know as a committee? Because what I'm hoping to get at the end of this is sound recommendations to be able to provide to the government on the best next steps in a timely, clear manner. So any information that you can provide today will help us to be able to have those clear recommendations and to be able to support a move in the right direction. Can you share your thoughts around that?
Well, let's put some boots to the ground and get running with it if we want to do it in a timely manner. Let's open up the markets, because we harvested 400,000 seals in a matter of a few weeks. 2 or 3 weeks actually at one time, and that was not a problem. So, but we've lost some of that infrastructure now along the way. But still, we can, if we could have access to markets, I think the rest of it will begin to fall in place. You get investments. I guarantee there'll be other countries wanting to invest into it. But the problem is we need to open up that access. When we had, before that European ban on seals, we were moving seal product at 3 times the price we're getting today. and we were moving all of the 400,000 that was being harvested year over year. But then that ban come in place and was just like turning a valve and closed it off.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I know it's a big question that I just asked you, and I appreciate that. And perhaps I could ask you, and I know I'm running out of time, so perhaps you can provide it in writing, but would you be able to provide us with, some tangible asks through FFAW, right? That fishers would be needing in order to move forward with a sustainable seal harvest if this were to move forward in a timely manner. Just because trying to understand what's currently in place and what we need. Is this information that you would have access to?
I think that we could gather some information. For me now, it gets busy this time of year, but I think if I could pass that along to the FAW, and I'm sure Elder there with the Canadian Sealers Association could gather whatever information you might want or need, and we could see where we go from there. But it sounds positive to have someone asking those questions, and I thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ms. Byron. That concludes our first hour of testimony. We'll suspend for a few minutes now to change out to our second panel. I want to thank all the witnesses for taking the time to appear today and share their knowledge with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones, Mr. Woodford, Ms. Boudreau.
comments for the benefit of the witnesses. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English or French. For those in the room, of course, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. All comments should be addressed to the chair. Finally, a reminder that the use of a House-approved headset is mandatory for all virtual participants in parliamentary proceedings. I would now like to welcome our witnesses, of course, appearing by video conference, Dr. George Rose, Professor of Fisheries. Representing CNL, we have Executive Director Ryan Cleary, who needs no introduction in any of these committee rooms, I'm sure, and Mr. Werv Wiseman, ex officio board member. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. You each have 5 minutes for an opening statement. We'll start with Dr. Rose, please, for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and greetings to everyone. I'd just like to make a few kind of broad ecological statements first about the situation on our east and west coasts, and then maybe get to some more specifics if as time allows and allow you for questions. I think it's beyond dispute that the marine ecosystems on both our east and west coasts are out of kilter, what I call out of kilter, which is just different, very different from the past norms that supported our fisheries on both coasts for hundreds of years. And one of the chief symptoms of this out of kilterness is a huge relative increase in some cases, in other cases not as huge, but an increase in pinnipeds relative to the things they eat, which is most everything in the ecosystem, but especially our commercially important fishes. Now, in ecology, it's kind of a stable ecosystem will have a pyramid of what we call trophic energy, or you look at it as biomass. That is, there should be, in simple terms, there should be a lot more small things than large things, because large things eat smaller things in generalities. And you should see that pyramid. That's what sustainable ecosystems kind of look like. If you look at, for example, our northern cod ecosystem off Newfoundland and Labrador, what you see is the exact opposite. What you see is the actual biomass of seals is greater than the biomass of cod and capelin put together in that ecosystem. Now, this is an extreme case of being out of kilter. Another thing that's really important from the ecological sense is that these species, most of the pinniped species, are migratory, so that they can sustain very high populations, not based on the commercial species that we're talking about, but on other things. And the commercial species or potential impacts on the commercial species can be looked at as kind of collateral damage from the standpoint of the pinnipeds. They don't need to be focusing on those species to have that big effect. And so that's kind of the case. And if we look at the case with harp seals in Newfoundland, which is on people's minds, some of the better studied cases are in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence with gray seals, which is clearly an example of the cod stock there, which in according to some of our better scientists, Dr. Swain and his colleagues down in that way, could even face extirpation because of pinniped predation. On the West Coast, now the West Coast here out in the Pacific is not immune from this either. There has been new immigration of California sea lions into the coastal areas of British Columbia. They're moving north, and this brings in the climate change impact, which is affecting just about everything. But recent studies by a colleague of mine, Dr. Carl Walters at UBC, has pretty well shown fairly convincingly that pinniped predation has severely impacted Fraser River salmon stocks, and is one of the reasons why out here on the West Coast as well, we're seeing this kind of inverted pyramid of biomass in our ecosystems. And it's depending, I guess, on what your goal is in managing ecosystems. If it is commercial fisheries, well, it's hard to look at this positively. To get to some sort of specific things, though, that I'm sure you are interested in. The northern cod ecosystem off Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, this is where I spent most of my career. I've been retired now for a number of years, but I spent most of my career there as a working scientist on the fish stocks, and that system there is extreme, as I mentioned earlier, and I do take exception with the DFO statement. If you look at their brochure on harp seals, they state that harp seal predation was not a significant factor in the lack of cod recovery, and there was no evidence that harp seals negatively impact capelin. I know the studies that this is based on. They were based on a couple of studies by colleagues over a decade ago. But I think the evidence for this, that they have no impact, particularly on capelin, is quite weak, and in some cases, really no substantial evidence of that at all. And that's one of the things I would like to stress from the ecological side, though, that the effects that pinnipeds can have, or any predators can have, are not necessarily direct. They can be indirect. The best example that I could use is that the effects on cod, for example, might be actually through capelin. By influencing capelin, you will influence cod.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. We're getting way over the 5-minute mark, almost up to another minute. I'll go now to Mr. Cleary. Mr. Weissman, I don't know if you're sharing your 5 minutes or... Okay, Mr. Cleary, when you're ready. 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans for the invitation to testify as part of this latest pinniped study. I say latest study because, as this committee has already heard, there have been dozens of federal government studies and reports since the early 1990s on the East Coast seal problem. To this point, Ottawa's seal strategy has been to study the animals to death. I can report conclusively to this committee, beyond the shadow of any doubt, that that strategy is not working. It was only last year that the Federal Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, in the biggest single advancement for the pro-sealing cause in decades, acknowledged, on behalf of the Government of Canada for all of the nations of the world to hear, that seals eat fish. What sweet central Canadian words those were to the ears of small boat fishermen and women of Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. Chair. There's an old joke back home that seals don't eat Kentucky Fried. But that joke stopped being funny years ago when the inshore fishery began fading before our eyes on every coast of Newfoundland and Labrador. As the seal population of Atlantic Canada has ballooned to 10 million plus animals, the number of small boat enterprises in my province alone, the sector that CNL represents, has dropped like a rock from more than 20,000 in 1992 to just over 3,200 today, and dropping every single year. That is no coincidence. Seal population up, fishermen population down. I attended a Northern Cod advisory this week in St. John's, and DFO mathematicians, they can't be called scientists anymore because there's not been any solid seal science in years. DFO mathematicians said with absolute confidence that seals do not impact northern cod. I remind the committee that this is year 31 of what was supposed to be a 2-year northern cod moratorium. The moratorium was supposed to end in 1994, 29 years ago. Seals eat millions of tons of fish a year, including the very capelin that northern cod feed on. Yet DFO managers and mathematicians, who, to be frank, have precious little credibility back home, can say with supreme confidence, the most confidence that I've ever heard DFO speak about any species, that seals are not having an impact on cod, are not really having an impact on any species, not snow crab, not northern shrimp, not capelin. DFO's poster boy species for successful fisheries management in eastern Canada is the seal, at the expense of the wild commercial fisheries, groundfish, pelagics, shellfish. In 1991, 32 years ago, the Leslie Harris Report on the State of the Northern Cod Stock recommended, quote, every reasonable effort must be made to understand the cod, capelin, seal interactions and to incorporate appropriate data into cod population assessments. That was not done. DFO still has no handle on cod, capelin, seal interactions. I can show you all kinds of videos of seal stomachs literally bursting with capelin and herring and snow crab. Cod stomachs and livers, they're not so easy to point out. The impact of millions of seals is not factored into fisheries management assessments. That is inexcusable. DFO is not doing its job. DFO purposely chose to ignore advice about incorporating seals into management assessments because seals take precedence over fishermen with the Government of Canada. And that's what it comes down to. It is absolutely undeniable. And DFO's chief cod mathematician can brazenly tell the world that seals are not having an impact. DFO has zero credibility. I can tell you that for a fact that 10 million plus seals are having a crushing impact on 520,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. Does that count for anything? I served for 4.5 years here in Ottawa as an MP, and the unwritten rule was there are two subjects MPs do not talk about: their pension plan and seals. Some parties may take public stands in support of the seal hunt, but in private their stand is you do not open your mouth. That is the Ottawa reality. The membership of CNL passed a motion at our February AGM, Mr. Chair, to demand that DFO develop an action plan to deal with seals on the Pacific and Atlantic coasts as well as Arctic waters within 6 months. That's CNL's advice to this committee. A final point, Mr. Chair, an important point about groups like Oceanic Canada that have the Liberal government's ear on fisheries management. It was only last year that Oceanic Canada called for the shutdown of the commercial capelin fishery, at the same time that DFO's own mathematicians said the impact of that 15,000-ton capelin fishery does not register on the capelin stock. It does not register. Not comparable in any way to the millions of tons consumed by seals. It's a job not to be suspicious of groups like Oceanic Canada that urgently recommend the counting of every last fish in Canadian waters when they don't have a policy on seals, when they don't have a policy on foreign overfishing outside the 200-mile limit. Groups like Oceanic Canada and Oceans North are seen as lackeys for the Government of Canada. Groups like Oceanic Canada don't say a public word about seals. They don't have official stands on seals. But if you review their social media posts, you'll read that baby harp seals are adorable, that harbor seals are the cutest, and that gray seals, well, they like to play peekaboo. What does that tell the members of this committee about their motives?
You're going way over your 5 minutes. We'll now go to our round of questioning. We'll start off for 6 minutes or less with Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will again be splitting my time this time with Mr. Small. Mr. Cleary, what is the, can you describe what the impact of managing only prey species and not managing predator species would be? And I've only got 2.5 minutes, or 3 minutes, because I got to split my time. So.
The answer is it's not proper management. If you're not managing the entire ecosystem, all the predators and the prey, that is not proper management.
Can you describe what the impacts would be?
Well, the impacts would be exactly what you have now. We have 3 cod stocks adjacent to Newfoundland. All 3 cod stocks are in the critical zone around Newfoundland. We have a moratorium, northern cod, year 31. You have a moratorium in 4R in the Gulf, year 2. We have a 1,500-ton quota on South Coast 3PS cod. All 3 groundfish stocks are in ridiculous shape. The capelin, which is one of the foundation species for our ecosystem, it's in ridiculous shape. It's not improving. Why is that?
Thank you. Mr. Rose, you spoke briefly about the evidence of impact on capelin as being quite weak. Could you elaborate on that a little further?
Mr. Rose?
No, he's on mute or something.
You're on mute, Mr. Rose.
Yes, excuse me, I forgot to press the button. These conclusions are based on studies that were done by DFO scientists well over a decade ago. The evidence is weak; it's all correlative, and the problem with that is that it doesn't prove anything in scientifically that proves no cause and effect at all. And it's just very, very weak. The data are weak to start with, and so on. And I think that probably if the main mechanism that's going on here in these ecosystems with the pinnipeds is removing prey of other species. It's been mentioned about capelin, so important in the North Atlantic, and the effects of this. There are studies that have been done in Norway that show this very clearly. What happens with capelin is going to affect what happens with seals and what happens with cod. And that's probably the main mechanism at work here. But the evidence
thank you all.
DFO is based on.
Thank you. I'll have to turn my time over to Mr. Small now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And heard Mr. Cleary say that the seals were studied to death, but hasn't really brought down the population, so there wasn't much death to it. Would we have to be here today doing this study if Bill C-251 had passed, do you think, Mr. Cleary?
No.
Well, I guess, we'll keep on going here. Mr. Wiseman. We heard a couple of witnesses earlier today talking about markets. Do you agree with these folks that the markets are the main thing that's holding back the harvesting of our current seal quotas?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, look, we can talk about the leverage that we have available to us to bring the seal population under control. You can talk about calls, but I think before proceeding on that path of calling, we have to give the fair chance to developing the marketplace. Look, I'm involved in fur farming. I operate the largest silver fox farm in the world in North Harbour in Newfoundland and Labrador. I've been involved at the organizational level. I've been a director on a Majestic marketing board with North American Fur Auction out of New York and Toronto and so on. We have, for a long time, for years, for decades, have had a framework of marketing and promotion for furs, for mink, for fox in particular, domestic farming and so on. And I've watched, in the international marketplace, I've watched the performance of the various companies involved in marketing and promoting all these furs. And I know that it was a taboo on the runways of Milan and on the runways of Hong Kong and Frankfurt and New York. It was taboo to talk and to bring seals into that particular domain. So why did this happen? I know likewise it's been almost taboo to discuss the issue of fur in trade negotiations, North American Free Trade Agreement, CETA, or what others, so many others, through the WTO, the EU, and some of the things that's been done. It seemed like it's absolutely taboo to discuss the idea of opening the gateway for seals and allow them to get in. And so until we've gone there and done that, then we really can't say we've done a good job at the marketing of seals.
Mr. Small, can I elaborate a bit on that first question that you asked? Go ahead. In terms of your bill to legislate the management of seal populations, that was doomed. You didn't have a chance because the government of Canada doesn't want managed seals. They don't want the management of seals incorporated into population assessments for other stocks. Again, the stand of the parties in Ottawa from my time here and I mean, I live and breathe this stuff, but they may have a public stand to support the seal hunt, but it's a public stand. The private stand is the opposite stand.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Time is up, and we'll move on now to Mr. Morrissey for 6 minutes or less, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. What's been interesting for this committee, we hear a lot of lecturing. We hear a lot of bravado statements. But I'm more interested in substantive answers on what steps have to be taken that, first of all, encourage fishermen. I'll go to you, Mr. Wiseman. Encourage fishers to actually utilize the resource that's allowed to be, that hasn't been for some time, so which is several 100,000 animals. I mean, I believe you can harvest between 400,000 and 500,000 animals, and we hear a lot of generalized statements, but those haven't worked because this problem has occurred over the past 20 years or so. So we have to get to the root of the problem of what has to be done that encourages fishers to go out and harvest the seal population that they're allowed to, and then begin on working from there. So if you could, what action would government have to take that would actually get the harvesters on the sea harvesting those seals they're allowed to? Mr. Wiseman?
Look, if you want to go back to, I'll go back too far. I think I'm 70 years old as of this year, and I grew up in a family of 14 who depended on the seal and sealing, and the kind that came from that. It was common throughout the 60s, even in the 1970s and 80s, to harvest 500,000 seals. So it's not rocket science to harvest it and to bring it ashore. Well, we're not doing it now because we have no marketplace. So, there.
Before you can have a
yes,
market. So where did the disconnect come between the customer? Because that harvest you were referring to was primarily dealing with taking the pelt off and marketing just that part. Am I correct?
Yes.
Now we're talking about a seal hunt that must utilize the full animal, so the dynamics of the harvest will be different. Am I correct?
Yes.
So we would need much different vessel capacity to sustainably harvest that animal.
Not necessarily.
No?
We still use the same. We can still use the same vehicles. The vehicles that we use now, if you want to use the vessels that we use, are it's customary to be. In fact, a lot of them now have the kinds of facilities on board that can sustain, sensitive products as they do, whether it's crustaceans, whether it's pelagics, doesn't matter what it is. It's actually in a much better position now to do this in an expeditious manner and to get it ashore very quickly. So then the question becomes, can it be facilitated on shore?
Right.
Yes, there had to be some modernization programming for sure, but the facilities are there. And then it's the gateways to the marketplace. So it's a balanced approach. Yes, science, absolutely.
So in that balanced approach, Canada depends heavily for some of its key fisheries. The U.S. is still our biggest market on seafood, somewhere around 70%, then the European Union. Can we take a risk with having those two marketplaces retaliate against Canada? Now, you can enter in the trade courts, which is a process that can take years and years. Could you give me an opinion on that? Does government have to be very cautious about how it moves in a harvest to ensure our key trading partners, which we depend on, do not retaliate against it?
Look, I may not have the perfect solution to this, but I understand from the motion that this committee has, in their terms of reference, basically, to do the kind of work that you're going to do, to solidify the kind of report that you're going to have, that you're going to be traveling internationally.
No, we're not. No, it was turned down.
Well, it was turned down, was it? Well, find some other way to ask Norway, have they managed to do that? To ask Iceland, to ask the countries that seem to have the fortitude to stand up and say, we are going to do what we have to do to harvest our seals and to do it on behalf of our fish harvesters and the people of our country. They did it, and they seem to be doing quite fine. I think it's a question of like priority and standing up. Will it be easy? Not necessarily, but other countries seem to be able to do it. So I think the answer lies there somewhere, and I think we do. Yes, have to take the risk. I don't see what the pet answer is to that, but I certainly don't see it as putting your tail between your legs and running, because that's what we've been doing up to this point.
And I agree. Successive governments have not have been unable to create a marketplace or find a marketplace that sustains a seal hunt. And Mr. Chair, I just want closing comment, because there was a reference made about the minister's statement. I just want the record to be clear. The minister was asked to make that statement by fishers in Newfoundland, who said, we want to hear a minister actually say publicly that seals eat fish. So that's why Minister Murray made that statement, because she was asked to by the fishers that were attending that summit. So with that, Chair, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. You're right on your mark for 6 minutes. Perfect. We'll now go to Madame Michaud for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you, Mr. Cleary, Mr. Wiseman, and Mr. Rose. We appreciate having you here today. And Mr. Cleary, I liked your opening remarks very much. Highly original. Sometimes it's a pity that one has to use irony to make one's point, but it had an impact on me, and I take my hat off for you. I've been here for 3.5 years at the House of Commons, and I've never spoken about my pension, but it's the first time that I've seen you at the Fisheries Committee, and I am talking about the seal harvest. What you're saying, what other witnesses have said, makes sense, and the DFO really needs to listen to fish and seal harvesters. This is a turning point, a watershed moment. Something has to be done. You've been crying it from the rooftops for years. What's unfortunate is that there is this issue with the pinnipeds, and let's say that tomorrow morning the government of Canada started to take an interest in the seal harvest. What should DFO's priorities be? More commercial fishery licenses, more investments in processing plants, an opening up of the local and international markets, a commercialization and marketing plan. In your opinion, what should the first steps be from Department of Fisheries and Oceans?
First steps, as I said in the opening remarks, the first steps are an action plan within 6 months. Action. Action. And action. I know a lot of harvesters who shoot on sight. If they're in a boat and they see a seal and it's interfering with what they're doing, they take the seal out. I think there's a lot more of that is going to be happening. I think that it's time for the rubber hit the road. I don't know exactly how it works in Australia in terms of kangaroos and the 100 million animals that they've taken out in the past decade or so. I don't know if there's a market for all of that meat and all of that skin. I don't know. I do know that, again, with a population of 520, our fisheries and our rural communities are suffering. Every single commercial species is suffering because of seals. It's time for action. And if the government of Canada doesn't take action, well, I personally I have no problem with the fishermen and fisherwomen of Newfoundland and Labrador taking action, because it's come to that point.
Right. Yeah, just as quickly as I can here. Look, on the ground, I mean, we have to get at the fundamentals. Science is a fundamental function of where we need to go. And I think there was a milestone achieved in St. John's last November, not necessarily because the minister had said seals eat fish, and I would hate to think that she said that under duress, by the way, but she did say it. Somewhere in the bureaucracy, there's a problem. I don't think it's at the ministerial level, other than the accountability of it. But for years it was purported that seals have no impact on the ecosystem. And, the chief scientist for DFO is the one that said that, and highly offended that somebody would suggest that. So now we've come out of this summit with a fundamental change in science. So we're going there. What we didn't achieve, though, at the summit was having a fundamental approach strategically to do the marketing. And some of the gateways to marketing is through our international agreements. I mean, how could we allow, the EU to pass morality clauses on the actions of fishermen engaged in a legitimate fishery? We allow that. But we have levers through some of our trade negotiations to do something about that. WTO has clauses to protect that. It's never been properly challenged. North American free trade agreements and so on, to try to see if we can leverage, the Species Protection Act that the United States has to prevent us from getting our seal products in. These are the items that we certainly have to address. And I think clearly doing proper science now that we're supposed to be doing, we'll have to wait and see on that. That will allow us then to neuter some of the outrageous and vacuous arguments that the animal welfare people keep using on it. So, and some are within that fundamental science, by the way. I have to say that it has to be acknowledged that fish harvesters do have a few clues about the population of seals, and it's got a few clues about what they eat. And I think that's important. So we have to factor into that mosaic of science, the idea of pure science, as well as the empirical knowledge provided by fish harvesters out on the ocean every day.
Well, if I could just push back on what you just said, Mr. Wiseman. So you think that the officials from Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, should listen to science, we all agree on that, but should communicate more with those folks out in the field who know full well that seals eat all kinds of fish stocks, they don't differentiate, and that there should be better communication ultimately between the DFO and fishers.
Please.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to utilize that information. It's not being properly utilized. Obviously, there's more parts to the equation than just the fish harvesters, but that's a piece that's missing. We just simply have eliminated that from the equation. And the idea that the science that we have is predicated on that we have to prove that it has no impact on fish populations. So we have to develop the proper terms of reference for the kind of science that we're doing. I don't know what that is. We're going in the right direction, but nobody really knows yet how, exactly what the wording, the language is going to be around that. So that's an important piece. But if we have to factor, we heard the witnesses there today, people who've lived on the water and understand the impacts and so on, and the frustration and the mistrust. There has to be a building of trust between the people who are out there on the oceans, the fish harvesters, and government, and DFO, and science, and so on. The mistrust that's there now when you hear ludicrous and silly statements, from scientists, educated scientists are saying 10 million seals has no impact on fish. Come on, that's a joke. Like, even bureaucrats in Ottawa who's never been to the east or west coast would know the difference of that.
Thank you, Madam Michaud. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. If I could just take a lighter note for just a second. I was listening, I'm originally from Newfoundland, I'm not sure if you're aware, and I was surprised to hear that the joke was surrounding Kentucky Fried Chicken and not Mary Brown's. That's a side. I always preferred Mary Brown's, but that's a side note. I wanted to actually see if Mr. Wiseman wanted to take some of my time to be able to bring in, to be able to speak to the committee today, some of his opening statement that he was hoping to present.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, look, a lot of what I said, and I'll have lived most of it here, is already statements that, were made and about the effects that it has on the socio-economic well-being of families, of hundreds of thousands, actually hundreds and thousands of harvesters out there. And I shared my experience growing up in a family of 14 of what it meant to get out there and to harvest animals in the 1960s and 70s and 1980s at a time when there were about, somewhere 2.5, 3 million seals. And we seem to have a sustainable harvest at that point, although we did agree that we'd like to build a little bit onto that. So I talked about that a fair amount. And then as we proceeded into the 90s and the year 2000 and beyond, there seemed to be that dropping off point that started to dictate that we were bringing, about 50,000 seals to the marketplace. So we went from that 500,000 amount of seals to that period of time for reasons that I'm not sure anybody can entirely understand, quite frankly. But clearly, and I mentioned this in here, that we allowed the animal welfare people to really come in the back door for reasons, that was very nefarious. And I think the lack of science, I spoke about that as well, and the rationalization for the kind of hunt that we should have, the poor science allowed these groups to come in and destroy the marketplace. So all roads, I think, ultimately leads to the marketplace, and I think we have to unravel that and understand that particular dynamic. And so it was the pressure of the animal welfare groups, among others, that then allowed the kind of legislation that we saw in the EU that cut off, a lot of populations, countries from accessing our products. And also, the bilateral, the trilateral, multilateral agreements, trade agreements, and so on, there was always an absence of language around seal. Like it was a taboo to even talk about it, let alone negotiate it. So we've missed something there. We've missed the gateways that allows us to access these countries. And I didn't speak a lot, but I alluded very quickly to the idea of a marketing framework. And there's always been an absence of a marketing framework. And I say this because I was on the board of directors that traveled globally to market fur products in mink and in fox in particular. And we grew the mink industry, by the way, to 125 million. 125 million. We overstepped a little bit. We've had to, rein that in. We're having challenges these days because of, the war in Ukraine. Our biggest buyers, long-eared furs in particular, in Russia, has been eliminated. COVID in China and so on has been a problem. There's no question about that. Plus, their economy is really declined a lot. But hey, look, that's geopolitical issues and so on that comes and goes and so on. But we're still missing that fundamental framework that's needed for marketing and promotion. Look, we have had fashion shows with mink and fox in the Great Hall of China. Would they consider that for seals? Why wasn't there seal products there? There's never been a collaboration with the marketing people, the marketing experts around the world to try to move that product out into the marketplace. Denmark created the Greenland Sealing Company, a massive enterprise that had a lot of success, and they put a lot of money into marketing of seals in Greenland, same seals that we are harvesting, and put them right into a world-renowned auction house in Copenhagen. And they also put seal product and worked with seal fashion in one of the greatest fashion houses that they've created that exist in Denmark as we speak. There's never been any discussion between the Canadian government to consider moving the seal product into these various venues and to promote them. So unless we build that international marketing framework, we're going to continue to be in trouble. Because, hey, look, we can talk about domestic use of product, even there in Canada, but it's not there. I mean, Canada is not going to take us where we need to go. We can set some examples, of course, local use of products and so on, and especially some of the nutraceutical, functional foods that we're now starting to derive from all this. And here's the other leg up. Here's the other piece of strategy that we could work on that we didn't have, say, with mink and fox. We could only talk about fur and fur products and so on. We couldn't talk about full utilization of a mink carcass, of a fox carcass. We were dealing with fur. So we have the fur from seal, and we now have the fat. We now have the meat products, the protein, all these functional foods. So anyway, I'm getting the flag that I've reached my time limit.
No, thank you, Ms. Barron. While Mr. Wiseman was speaking that time about utilising the fat and everything, I finished my last bottle of seal oil capsules the other day, so I have to replenish them. We'll now go to Mr. Hanley for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. I've really been enjoying this testimony, so I really appreciate all three of you for appearing today. And I want to pick up on some of the themes that we've just been hearing from Mr. Reisman, but go back to you, Dr. Rose. And I've had the opportunity to look at some of your writings and learn of your experience, particularly regarding northern cod. And one of the themes I think I'm picking up is really the lack of investment in rigorous stock assessment over the years. Therefore, lack of reliable data, therefore leading to erroneous conclusions being drawn. And if we're going to try to continue to document the effects of seals on cod, and particularly if we do actually get into serious augmentation of harvesting, then how can you talk about the importance of rebuilding our ability to survey cod and other fish stocks, and how do we need to better include fishers' observations in the evidence gathering?
Yes, well, thank you for that question. I think it's really important. We've for a number of years, I guess we've had difficulty, particularly in the Atlantic regions, with surveys, vessels. This is well known to people, and I was involved in this for 30 plus years. It's well known that goes a long way, but it seems that recently it's got more extreme. I mean, some of the more important species that we have commercially that depend on the surveys just aren't getting done, and it's been blamed on vessels that are not serviceable, and we've got new vessels coming in and they weren't calibrated with the old vessels, and you can ask questions about, well, why wasn't that done more efficiently, and so on and so forth. But the bottom line, as pointed out, is that the data, which is all important in answering any of these questions that we have, the data that we have is just for some of the key species, capelin, now cod, the data just isn't there. And so, trying to answer these questions, and what science does when data isn't there is it creates a model, which is just an abstraction. And, unfortunately, models can prove just about anything. And that's sometimes where it goes astray. But, if I can kind of answer a previous question, I feel I have to put in some lines of defense for science, because it's certainly in the questions of the interactions between pinnipeds and fish, it isn't universally accepted among working scientists that there's no effect. That's simply not the case. There are very good examples within DFO, for example, of scientists that have published things that are definitely on the side of, yes, there's an influence. We may not be able to quantify it because of the lack of data that we've referred to, but there's almost certainly an influence. To argue otherwise is kind of ecological nonsense. And that's true on the East Coast and the West Coast. And so, when it comes right down to it, we need better information on these things. There's no doubt about that. And in the last, it seems to me, particularly in the last few years, the situation, far from getting better, which we hope it would, has been getting much worse.
Thank you. And you spoke of the West Coast, and I wanted to bring you back to the West Coast, where you are already. But it's around a focus. And one of the interesting suggestions last week that we had from Ken Pierce and Matt Stabler, I think in particular, who suggested that they're from the Pacific Balanced Pinniped Society, and they suggested, hey, we're kind of ready to go. We could harvest 5,000 seals and evaluate the effect with a view to scaling up according to the results. And I was, let's in a way of just let's get on with this and then evaluate what we do as part of a scientific assessment of harvesting and evaluation. I just wondered what your thoughts are on such. How that could work, and is that something you think could be scientifically justified and in building our expertise, but also on starting to go down that pathway of apparently something we're not supposed to be speaking about?
Well, yes. I mean, this comes under the kind of a heading of what we used to call experimental management. And management is tough. There's no question about that. It's very difficult to know. But one of the ways that it operates right now is on kind of model projections, which are always questionable at best. But another way to look at this is that's what you've just described is what we'd call experimental management. Now, we don't know the outcome, but that's kind of the whole idea. But putting in place experiments like this, it's very interesting from the standpoint of management, from the standpoint of science. It's incredibly interesting to actually get real data on a well-controlled experimental basis that would involve harvesters. And that's been spoken to before, and I totally agree with that. The involvement of harvesters is key to success of any management. And, that would allow that would facilitate that in a big way. So, yes, without going into specifics or details, in principle, in general, from a science standpoint, my own view is very positive towards
Thank you, Mr. Rose.
Like that.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. We'll now go to Madam Michaud for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Rose, in your opening remarks, you spoke about the impact of climate change and that is likely to lead to more migration towards the north with the expansion of pinniped populations on both coasts. You talked about California and the seals on the east coast. Could you please elaborate on the effects of climate change on pinnipeds? We know that currently the harvest occurs from November to December. Is that still the case? Perhaps due to climate change, the season is more January through March. Therefore, should we tweak things? And could you elaborate on the impact of climate change writ large, please?
Well, yes. Thank you for that question. The climate change is impacting marine animal distributions, fish and mammals right around the world. There's ample evidence of that. Now, in some cases, it's extreme. In some cases, it's minor. In the case of pinnipeds, let me just say a few words about the West Coast first. There have been massive increases in the Salish Sea. This is off southern British Columbia. In the California sea lions, they are, in some ways, they could be called an invasive species. They were never here before. They're fish eaters, big salmon eaters. And so, this impact that's taking place is changing the predator-prey relations. Now, on the East Coast, the best example of this, or probably the most extreme, is the expansion of gray seals, which I did a lot of work. I spent half my life, it seemed, in Placentia Bay for a period of almost 2 decades, some years ago, and never, ever saw a gray seal. Now, I haven't been there recently, but people that I know there will tell me, and some of the others that are more knowledgeable of the current situation there could speak to this, perhaps. But that gray seals now are seen on the south coast of Newfoundland and maybe even colonizing there. So there you have another example where climate is changing. Seals will respond to temperature in the ocean and also to prey distributions. And if they can find those two favorable factors, they will move there, especially, and this is key, if their populations are expanding, because it's like anything else. When a population expands in numbers, it's going to try to expand in area. That is they're not all going to stay in the same place for as their populations increase. So both of those things are happening. It's less clear what's happening on the northeast coast of Newfoundland and Labrador because these are ice seals, the harps and hoods, and they may move north. Not sure about that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rose. And I want to say that extinguishes our time for today's committee. 1 second now, Mr. Perkins, please. I want to say a big thank you to our guests and the second hour. Dr. Rose, Ryan Cleary, of course, who's no stranger to the Hill, and Merv Wiseman. The clerk has advised me that the meeting started at 3:30. It has to end at 5:30. Meeting adjourned.